Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Hoots, and thanks for joining Rated Green for an interview of one of our members, Ted Atwood of Trakref. Refrigerant is part of our HVAC or refrigeration systems that helps transfer heat out of our built environment, making it cooler. Unfortunately, this product is mostly poorly managed, so Ted has come up with a way to help track refrigerants so operational cost and energy bills will go down while reducing global warming potential. Ted, can you tell us a little bit about what your company does and how it also affects the environment?
Refrigerants have a very high global warming potential. And for 26 years, various regulations have been applied to try to reduce leak rates unsuccessfully. We still leak the same amount of refrigerant today that we did 26 years ago, which is 100% of all the refrigerants produced presently are leaked or assumed to have leaked. We don't really, as an industry or a marketplace, have a really good grasp on what's happening to these materials in their service life. Most people add refrigerant to a system, or most service people add refrigerant to a system, and they have usually they transfer that information between service provider and building owner using an invoice. And the invoice doesn't really recognize the total impact to the leak, to the system of the refrigerant added. And then you'd have to look through all the invoices in order to understand the total impact that's been occurring over that system's life. At about 7 years old, the system starts to be pretty dramatic. So what we did is we put some activity tracking in place to supplement what was happening on invoices. So all of the normal things that you think of on an invoice. Who showed up, what work did they do, what system did they work on. What we did is we took that and we turned it into a set of drop downs and questionnaires that were really easy to answer. And as they would do work, it would continue to ask them different questions. And those questions never took more than 2 minutes to answer the whole entire questionnaire. But they were intended to bring visibility to the leak rate so that the service company would know and also the owner of the building would know, or manager. And so it started as a service 2 decades ago, but it really turned into a product because software gave us a chance to help make these behavioral changes and awareness without having to talk to each individual user. So today, there's over 35,000 people using Trakref and managing their refrigerant usage in
So,
order.
so, so this is an app that looks like you have on your phone. You can probably, is this something that you can use on your computer as well, or does it have to be a mobile device?
No, it's desktop and mobile. They each do something different. They're very complementary to each other. Usually, the service people use the app, when they're recording work or doing their activity, and then that information is managed by an office staff. And we even help supplement that along the way. We create
So,
alert awareness.
so this is dependent upon the person that's actually out in the field. Does this so when they say this is much how much refrigerant they put into it or taken out of the system, because obviously they need to decommission systems as well and track that. So basically this is in and out tracking, or just how much you put in and measuring
Wow.
the levels the next time you come back around.
Yeah. So, first of all, we have to assume that almost all the work being done is being done by a service person that may not work for the company that owns the equipment. So maybe it's a property and they have 3 or 4 service people doing work. And so they didn't sign up for this. 25 or 30 years ago, when they got their license to maintain equipment, they were signing up to, use their mind and hands to solve problems, not document them. And, that's such an important group of people that it became ever more important over time that without engaging them and making something that worked for them, we were going to continue to fail. So the service guys are who the product is built for, in the field to do their data capture. Average age right now is somewhere above 45. not very far above that, but that's about the average age. So you don't have a really high-tech savvy, comfortable group of people. You've got people that drive a truck and have a lot of demands. As a matter of fact, one of the more interesting problems in this industry is that although the infrastructure for refrigerants has grown by over 400% in the last 25 years, the service group that supports that infrastructure has largely stayed the same.
Wow.
So yeah, we do. We support those guys. That's our frontline workforce. And then we want to just create an alert system and awareness back at management so that they can take action based on what's happening with their equipment.
So this is mainly, so I guess so what happens with this data? So like you mentioned, like monitoring, usually what's measured gets improved upon. So when the service guys are adding refrigerant or trying to maintain the system, when they put that data in, will there be an alert? It's like, hey, you've lost so many pounds of refrigerant. Like what is done with this data? And I guess why should all of us care? Because everyone says refrigerant management's important, but why is it important? And how is measuring it going to fix it? Does that mean the line set needs to be replaced? The equipment needs to be replaced? Like what is usually done with this data? And what's the action?
A lot of equipment is field assembled. So it's put together on site. A piece of pipe runs through a wall. You have a condenser, an evaporator. You've got all these moving parts, and every one of those moving parts over time will potentially be a leak. And so I don't know. Every system is so different. I don't have an answer for any one specific silver bullet here, except that as we adjust our escalation based on what's happening. You have a small leak, we respond appropriately. We have a larger leak, we escalate that again. And what's happened up until now is usually the escalation policy on most of these appliances has been triggered by how much it costs to repair it. So if you keep the cost below a certain amount, historically, it would never manifest itself as something to worry about. And so as the price of refrigerant has dropped, some of those invoice numbers have lowered, and so the assumption is we're doing okay. Well, at activity levels, let's say the leak rate's at 10%, we're going to escalate the notifications to a certain degree. If it doubles, we're going to increase that escalation policy. And managers don't have to do any of the work. They've contributed enough feedback to us that we take what's happening and what they would do, and we build adjustments into the workflow. So maybe a new work order needs to be generated. We auto-generate them. Maybe that we now ask for the service provider to give us more information. So we escalate it. And you got to remember, the guy who does the work turns in the paperwork to his office. The office turns it into accounting. Accounting then reviews it. By the time the property owner or manager sees this, it's probably a quarterly review, comfortably 90 days after the work may have been completed. What we do is we bridge that gap between the service provider and the property owner manager so that they can more rapidly, we're talking hours and days, not months, connect on what has to happen.
So, what about the environmental impact? Are there regulations that say you have to manage a refrigerant, and if you're leaking so much that you'll get some potential fines from the EPA? I don't know the answer to this. I'm just asking.
No, there are some fines and violations, but you pretty much have to have a really high impact before an agency like the EPA can even focus on it. We're starting to see states that have much more robust regulatory actions taking place. California, the usual suspects, Colorado, Massachusetts, New York. There's a group of states called the U.S. Climate Alliance, and we're starting to see them put more actions in place to help control this. But at the end of the day, most people don't even recognize that the average leak rate in the United States is 25%.
Wow. And is this mostly on commercial or residential as well?
Well, when I use average, the assumption is it's across the board. Out of the roughly 2 billion pounds of installed inventory in the United States, and that's a rough number, we leak about 600 million pounds.
Wow.
That's
And
quite a
some
bit.
of that, oh, just to caveat that, some of that does go into new equipment, let's say 80 to 100 million pounds. But as that new installation is put in place, that eventually will leak also.
So I guess this sounds like it's mostly a tool to benefit the property managers who are just trying to figure out, how bad their equipment is, and if the leak rate is pretty excessive, instead of just putting more refrigerant into it for it to leak out, this just gives them opportunities like, hey, this equipment's on at the end of its life cycle or needs to be repaired. So is that the primary focus of this? Because it sounds like there's not enough really fines to make the penalties to be big enough to make people want to care. But it sounds like this is still a monetary thing versus an environmental thing for most of these property managers.
Yeah, and actually, there's three areas of financial impact for every property. The first one is the more these units are leaking, the more maintenance they take. So it makes sense. The older a building gets, the more maintenance the building requires in order to keep it operating at comfortable levels. So the commercial maintenance team that's doing the work, they have no other way to communicate that to property management other than to just continue to build them. So number one, maintenance goes up. This is a great communication tool because maybe it's smarter to replace it rather than continue to let it leak. Number two, big one, energy. There's almost a one-to-one correlation between refrigerant leak and energy consumption. So if the average leak rate in the United States is 25%, that means you have a roughly 25% increase in energy due to that leak on your HVAC system. That's a big number. We work a lot with grocery stores and data centers and hospitals and hotels, and those numbers become significant, in the thousands of dollars a month for every location.
Wow. So basically, you can have a certain SEER rating. Let's just say it's 10 SEER, and if you have a 25% leak, then it ends up becoming like essentially a 7 SEER system because the efficiency is lost on an average season across all the seasons. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it gets more amazing as the SEER ratings get higher and we put more of a critical charge into these systems. So we keep trying to get the charge down, which is great. But what happens is now that charge is critically charged, so it's the least amount of charge we can get away with. As those leaks occur, the energy consumption numbers can actually go above 1-to-1.
So it looks like there's different ways the property managers can look at this. One, they're trying to keep their operational costs down from an energy point of view, because especially if they have an area that takes a lot of heating and cooling, and if some of these are used as heat pumps as well, then that's going to help them. But also just on the maintenance cost, and like when you see things are about to die and you're losing a lot of refrigerant, that's either a sign that you've got a major leak somewhere, which is going to cost you, but also could be inside the equipment, which means it needs to be repaired before there's additional cost from having to replace the equipment altogether.
Yeah, that equipment life expectancy was the third thing that really has a big impact, because you could be dealing with a unit that you installed and it may be almost obsolete, and you may be trying to maintain it in its obsolete state. So maybe the refrigerant's been phased out, or maybe your vendor is more concerned that they won't have access to those refrigerants. So as those leak rates go up on these obsolete systems, just knowing which of those systems is most at risk, and knowing how to plan to focus your dollars, that's absolutely key.
Well, it also sounds like you can be putting additional wear and tear on a newer system if it's leaking just from a improper install, and this could also help determine that. Because if you're putting additional stress on the system, it's not going to last as long either.
We did a what they call a charge survey, so like a refrigerant capacity charge survey with an airport that had over 1,000 assets, and 90% of the assets were not properly charged, and it led to massive changes in their equipment life cycle.
And operational costs. Sounds like the energy bills were going up as well as a result.
Energy is the sleeping giant here. It's a big deal. You could turn your entire property to solar or wind or some type of alternative energy, only to find out that you're still wasting 25% of your HVAC oriented energy.
It'd be really cool if you had some sort of sensor on the equipment where you could decrease or detect a decrease in the static pressure between one side and the other, and it'll let them know like if they need to change their air filter as well. I mean, that'd be kind of cool to see both monitored at the same time.
It's funny you bring it up. COVID sort of brought this to more of a critical thinking process than it was before. Air filters are another one of those, and this is nothing I'm deeply knowledgeable about, just officially. But COVID's brought to our attention that from our own client group, they feel as though 70% of their filters don't get changed out at the right time. And so it's interesting because if you don't change out your filter, so your filter gets constrained, and your system is running at a higher than usual leak rate, or average leak rate, then you've got a unit that's not just running below its SEER expectation, but it's running inefficiently and under stress. So it's like running it in the red line.
I mean, you can cause your coil to freeze up if it doesn't have enough airflow across it to have that transfer of energy. That's an issue. And most of that is due to just a clogged filter, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, so you put all these things together, right? Clogged filter, low refrigerant charge, poor maintenance, and you've got like the lungs of a building that aren't getting adequate resources to function properly. It's a real problem.
But if you add that to your app, just like when they change the filter, I mean that wouldn't that be pretty easy to add to the software?
It's in there. Yeah, we put it in.
Oh, it is in there? Okay.
We just added it as a courtesy because what we were talking to a magazine and they were asking us some information, and we decided to survey our clients to see how they fit. And the clients were the ones who told us that they felt their air filters weren't being adequately changed. And the number, 70% inaccuracy in that number.
So I guess the bottom line here is like what comes out of the box doesn't necessarily mean the efficiency that you're getting. So like when you're doing these energy models, you have to change your air filter, manage your refrigerant, and there's a few other things you need to do. Make sure you've got proper airflow in your space, and otherwise you're not going to get the performance that you're expecting.
Right, you can't ignore these things. We got away with it for decades because the refrigerant costs were low and there was no penalty, or we didn't have to observe it, or I might manage the facility, but I don't manage energy. So that's somebody else's bucket and silo. So you push it over to the guy on the energy side. And the energy guy, he's got this challenging responsibility getting details from the facility guy without having control. So what we did is we tried to bring these two groups together along with the service providers so that it was more visible to all of them. And that's actually working. It's working well.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to also monitor energy consumption to notice if there is a leak. So, I mean, how often are people checking the refrigerant levels on one of these systems?
Not very often. They check it when there's a leak. That's why we get to 25% leak, because your unit might run adequately at, let's say, a 10% leak rate, but you won't find out that you have a real leak until you get to warmer or colder weather where your unit's running in extreme conditions. And that's when it won't do the things that you expect it to do. Your butter melts, your office gets hot, your data center starts to break down. We tend to triage our maintenance, not really do preventative maintenance. So refrigerant is very similar to filters in that regard. They're very infrequently checked up on.
Now, are there ways to add sensors to these systems? Because I know there are sensors you can put on there to detect pressure drops across the filter. Is there anything that you can put on for refrigerant to add to your software?
Yeah, they have leak alarms that are out there. Ironically, though, the leak alarms or the level alarms, the guys are smart. They know how to create situations where the alarms won't go off at inconvenient times. So I won't say they outsmart the alarm, but what they do is they create conditions that are more advantageous for showing up on a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, or let's say 7 to 3, rather than Saturday morning at 8 or Sunday night at 2 in the morning. And so there are plenty of tools out there to create awareness, but it's how you manage it that really makes a difference. And how much refrigerant did it leak? It'll just tell you that, okay, your alarm went off, you had a low level, maybe the receiver's too large, or there's all kinds of things, but you need to know exactly how much gas got added on what date, and you need to be able to watch that trend line.
Well, it sounds like there just needs to be a lot more consumer awareness and education, and that's kind of the point of this video right here.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate all the content you guys are creating on your channel as well, just trying to bring some awareness. But I'm a builder. I'm a green builder. Actually ran part of an HVAC company at one point, and even still, like, I'm constantly learning about this. I'm in the industry and I'm still learning. Means that the average consumer has no idea whatsoever. So it just shows me that there's still so much room for improvement, which means more opportunities for people like you, it sounds like.
It's over 26 years of doing this. Most people think there's a government regulation somewhere that tells the mechanical contractor that he's responsible for this, but it's really not. It's the property owner, it's the building owner, the manager. The mechanical contractor is responsible for recording and reporting of their refrigerant usage, but not your leak rate, not your leak inspection count, not your install or shutdown or even retrofit. That's the ownership's job. And it's so interesting how many of these associations have very little awareness about what those obligations are or how significant the leak rate is.
Well, so where are the most opportunities for your business? Are we looking at on the consumer side or the commercial side? Like, where are you trying to grow right now? Which markets?
We're definitely focused on the industries I mentioned before: data centers, commercial properties, grocery stores. We have a lot of grocery stores. We love those guys because they really care and they have a high energy density. But also the other groups, hospitals, hospitality industry. As they start to get in and manage their energy and their appliances better, these refrigerant issues continue to crop up, and so it becomes a much bigger, more important KPI for them to manage.
Now, I know a lot of times when you're trying to do refrigerant testing and charging and whatnot, sometimes you can accidentally contaminate the refrigerant. Is there a way that they can do the testing on this without actually losing refrigerant and test the charge on it?
Well, okay, so contamination comes in two forms. One is contaminants from, let's say, a recovery cylinder that could bring oil or moisture into the system. Another one is where you mix two refrigerants together. One of the first tasks in setting up any account for us, and even doing an energy audit, is identify all the equipment on site. Get very specific about the assets that you have. Surprisingly, we just finished a brand new review of a brand new client. They sent us all their records they had just had audited, over 1,000 locations. Not one of those assets had either the refrigerant type or the charge in them. And what happens is these assets get messy to track after time. Within a year of the warm Georgia sun, right, it's going to erode or wear out a lot of the label. You leave any label outside for a year in a warm climate, Tennessee, Georgia, it doesn't matter where you are. It's going to be impossible to read that. So what ends up happening is they can't read it. They go up on the roof. They can get a few numbers off of it. And then it becomes the responsibility of the maintenance team. And this gets even more serious when you think about, usually a brand new building, the owner will say, or manager, I don't need any maintenance this year. It's brand new. Let's leave it till next year. And by the time that maintenance guy shows up, the tag is almost illegible. So he's making a guess about the appliance type. And there's a variety of different refrigerants. And he's not sure of the one that's in there. And this happens all the time. So the idea is start early with a great a great asset history or asset list, and then build out from there. And that'll eliminate a lot of those cross-contamination issues.
Well, it sounds like a lot of these people can, I mean, you can add even other things to your list besides refrigerant. I mean, you've got refrigerant filters, and I can see like having lighting, boilers, other things on there eventually. Are you looking to explore and go into those areas, or mainly to stay on refrigerant for right now?
Well, with a 25% leak rate after 26 years, and the leak rate hasn't changed, and we're still emitting 100%, there's a real deep passion on this team to try to help solve this problem. And although it might seem very single-minded, it's not. I think there's a lot of people like yourself who are learning about it and then what you can do to solve the problem. The solution is easy once you have awareness. And if we could get that under control, I might let myself experiment with some of these other issues. But really, we're driven by this passion to drive leak rates down and make this incredibly simple for everybody. Well, when Drawdown got published and they reluctantly put refrigerant management as the top potential to reduce carbon emissions, I say reluctantly because if you ever watch any of their interviews or talk to them, they really wanted something sexier. Oh, yeah, this is the sexiest topic. It would have been great if it were electric cars or wind power or, even empowering women in the energy space. But it was this unsexy, horrible, boring topic of refrigerant management. What do you do with it? And, it was funny because there was a lot of talk about it. And then people were like, what does that mean, refrigerant management? Like, how do you manage this material that no one can see when it gets vented? Where do you get started? And that left confusion for a lot of people because to go out and buy a solar panel to offset your energy, that's a great thing to do. It's easy. You can point at it. It's a widget. We can buy widgets. We can find places to invest. But managing refrigerant is a process. It's a mindset. And that's much more difficult if you have never done it.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for your time.
Matt, I feel as though it's the first of many conversations.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching this video. For more information on topics like this, we invite you to search for other products, services, companies, and people on the Rated Green directory. Unlike other websites, searching is free, listening is free, becoming a member is free, and listing your green products is free.